Welcome back to our second episode of the Grow Wealth podcast. Today, we're going to explore the topic of real estate and technology, otherwise known as prop tech, and its prop tech's impact on the future of the real estate sector. Now, my goal for you, as well as my clients with my company, Grow Wealth Group, is to bring you the latest, most up-to-date, relevant information out there to you. You can today start learning about the different financial vehicles to help you grow your wealth, such as real estate or even starting and growing a business. However, by the time you're done, something new has popped up. That's how fast the world is changing, and this is what we are witnessing before us. Now, technology is driving the change in the real estate sector. And I was recently looking at a PricewaterhouseCoopers Emerging Trends in Real Estate report, and it was showing that in the last 2 years, there has been an $8.6 billion of venture capital injected into the prop tech sector. That is, in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, it was only $2.2 billion. That means all this capital injected in there, there's a lot of startups working on the technology aspect of real estate. So it's not just, all the data we've been seeing, such as on Zillow or Property Stream, where you can go online and pull up all this data on any property, or FaceTime property viewings that COVID helped accelerate, or helped start, should I say. So all this capital is going to accelerate all of this to another level. So my guest today is Richard W.J. Brown. He's joining us here today from Sao Paulo. He is a longtime property investor, business owner, and researcher, and he's the author of PropTech, a guide to how property technology is changing how we live, work, and invest. So he's joining us here today, and he's going to open our eyes to the biggest trends out there in property technology, so you can find out about this stuff and work smarter and remain competitive. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Aisha. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. I went through your book. I read your book, and I was very impressed with the amount of time and research you put into this. How did your fascination with property tech start to motivate you to write a book like this?
Yeah, it seemed like a crazy idea, really, in retrospect. Thank you for reading the book as well. I really appreciate that. Essentially, I guess I like, you call me a researcher. I like to spot trends, I think. I read a lot and, different types of publication, and just trying to work out what's happening. And I started to notice some, kind of emerging trends in the property sector, which were more technology driven. And then you've got this crossover from different sectors, from fintech or financial technology, for example. And we'll get into some of the elements of it. But I started to spot this. And then I thought, well, this is a leading trend. This is something that's coming downstream, and not many people are actually talking about it as a topic, prop tech. So I've got my own podcast, which is called the Property Voice podcast. And in January 2018, I started an interview series with a range of what I call big brains from the prop tech sector. And I interviewed them over about 6 months or so. And then I stole all their ideas and put them into the book. So that's kind of how it happened and how it evolved. So 2018, that was my prop tech year, or my prop tech passion project year.
And have you continued your exploration, your research, or did you just stop with the book?
I would say it's a lot softer. I don't know if you've written a book, but I can't
I
remember if
have
you.
written a book. I have an Amazon bestseller called Earn It, Grow It, Keep It.
Yeah. So that was my second book. I'm just writing my third one. There's quite a lot of energy and time and resource that goes into writing.
Absolutely.
So
Lots of mental space.
absolutely. So I kind of moved into a slightly different direction after that. So don't test me too much on the detail of, what's on page 34, for example.
No, no, not at all.
So I think I've been monitoring it from a distance. I think, interestingly, with you inviting me to come and talk to you today, I did obviously revisit the book. It's 3 years now since I published the book, and a lot has changed in 3 years. And so, for example, I do recall there's some people I mention as resources. The book is more, it's international, but it's predominantly UK technology led, I guess. But there were a couple of people I referenced in the book which don't exist anymore. So that's one of the things with this sector. And you were talking about the venture capitalists pouring money into, we interviewed somebody from Pi Labs, for example, and they kind of working on a 1 in 10 bet or something like that. So a lot, 9 out of 10 of these these startups may not survive. So it's picking the right technology, actually, whether you're an investor in the technology or whether you're a user of the technology, can actually be, a bit stressful and quite important to make that decision.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that a lot of people aren't talking about prop tech, and I agree with you. I was talking to a couple of people and I said, oh, my next podcast is going to be on prop tech. And they said, what's that? They looked at me with a blank stare. Can you help us understand, our listeners understand, what that actually means and the different sectors? And it's vast. So can you break that down a little bit into layman's terms and help us understand what property technology is?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I think I'll start with the obvious, which is it's a merger of two words, which is property and technology. Obviously, just like fintech is finance and technology. So it's the merging of these two worlds. So we've got bricks and mortar on the one hand, and we've got data and software and apps and things like that on that hand. And it's bringing them the two together to make sort of use applications which are helpful. But then it breaks out. It's a very difficult sector to define. So you've got principles like what's called construction technology. For example, you've got the sharing economy, things like Airbnb. You've got smart home technology and fintech or financial technology. They're the sort of that's Pi Labs' definition of prop tech, which is 4 segments, which is basically where they're putting their money. But I think if you, in my terms, when I wrote the book, I actually thought there were more subsections to the sector. And so I've got more than 4 in the book. I might have to refer to the table of contents just to remind myself. But, so I've mentioned some of them, but, extra ones to mention are audiovisual type uses, blockchain technology, and perhaps looking at a little bit further forward, things like megatrends and smart cities. So there's probably between 4 and about 8 different subsections, and there's a bit of a blurring in some senses as well. So
Okay.
It's kind of difficult to exactly define it. And that's one of the reasons, funny enough, I wrote the book, is it kind of pulls it together. And I should say that I'm a property guy who's interested in technology rather than a technologist who, operates in property. So I'm not a geek.
Right. Well, I'm a property person as well, and that's why I wanted us to approach this from a perspective of a real estate investor, someone who buys and sells property for a return on investment. So looking at that from that perspective, can you draw from your book existing and upcoming technologies that you might have referenced, for example, audiovisual enhancements, that a property investor, as they're going through the transaction, from finding it to analyzing it and so forth, funding it, what can a property investor adopt that will enhance his performance throughout the transaction?
Sure. I think, for individual property investors, smaller businesses in the property sector, it's more evolution than revolution. It's also more about, I think, productivity tools and process, tools, rather than some, revolutionary, earth-shattering changes. So, they're micro changes. So you mentioned, for example, the process, find, analyze, fund, or an exit. And if you start with finding, sourcing property, you could look at things like mapping technology, and there's various listing sites which allow you to, they'll be different in the States, so perhaps what I'm using. So if I use different names, it may not apply. But you can find, sites. You can find a lot of data relating to those sites. You can have automated valuation tools. You can have, property data listing, subscription-based services where you can, sift and profile to source properties. Mobile app listing technology now, that's all in the finding. There's probably more. In terms of analyzing, automated valuation is an interesting one. There's data aggregators, so you can now list your property on multiple either rental or sales portals through an aggregator. That makes your life easier, and to put the word out.
We have the MLS system here, which we've had for a while.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, so let's take, for example, maybe take it into a different segment. Let's talk short-term rental or service accommodation type of letting. You can, what they call the online travel agents, things like Booking.com, Airbnb, TripAdvisor, for example. Correct. And you can get an app or technology now which you can put into that one app, and that distributes to all of those. So one of them is Tokit. There's other ones that you can utilize, and the same applies as well with listing a rental property. So in the UK, for example, you've got Home Renter. Put it on this app and it distributes to some of the property portals. So it simplifies. But equally, you can use, I'm talking about this is in the sales side of it really now. You can also utilize things like, I said on the funding side of it, this is kind of, I think, could be really exciting, because you've got, the mainstream banks and lenders, but then you've got emerging financial providers like peer-to-peer lenders, crowdfunding platforms, and even the emergence of blockchain funds now. They're still alternative, but it's bringing in, new types of funding, equity-based, funding to our opportunities. So there's quite a lot of things you could do in that space, and I think that's going to grow. And then you can use online listings or self-listing sites to sell, for example. But what I'm really describing is a whole range of different individual tools which you can utilize to make your life easier.
Right, so you can become more efficient.
Exactly, it's more productivity gain. It's more simplifying processes rather than, something, radical right now. But I wouldn't, what I talk about in the book is, maybe today, real estate's quite a slow moving industry in itself. So technology is fast moving, real estate's slow moving. So you're kind of bringing these two different forces together, and there's a bit of a struggle. And I think, who's going to win? But I think maybe in 5 to 10 years, you'll start to see what you might call more radical change. But in the immediate short term, it's probably about process gains, productivity, making life easier, and just being maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead of the next guy.
And using a lot of online data, like Zillow and Property Stream and things like that. Absolutely. It's so easy to find data now online on a property. What about audiovisual advances such as VR, augmented reality, drones? Yeah. I find that to be exciting. Absolutely.
And I think, so for example, you could show a home to me. I'm in Sao Paulo. Well, I don't know exactly where you are, but you're obviously in the US. And we're in different subcontinents. And you could show me that technology remotely. It could be, audiovisual tools that we use. There could be computer-generated imagery that's utilized to give a visual impression. And if you think about, if you're a developer, for example, and you build, a lot of developers, they build like a housing estate or something, and invariably they'll have a show home. Excuse me. they'll have a show home. And so that's an expensive investment, right? To build a show home, just for the purposes of showing people. And it's fixed in that location. Imagine, being able to, visualize that from a distance. It's and that's where things like augmented reality and virtual reality can play a part. And then obviously we've just bring it back to like, let's say a real estate investor who's renting property. You can maybe sort of have like video fly through, which kind of takes you through a virtual tour. And as you say, if you've got the right kind of property which has got land, or you can do drone views, and it's not expensive. Necessarily. I mean, you can get a Matterport, and that kind of is an expensive piece of kit, but you can reuse that. So people.
What is a Matterport? What is that?
Matterport. It's basically the sort of the 360-degree
yes.
camera.
A camera. Okay.
It's a camera, and
yes.
So the basic listings are just text and photographs on a portal, and it doesn't take a lot to make yourself stand out more. Maybe you have a floor plan. Well, what if you actually put some furniture in the floor plan so you can visualize that? What if you had a drone, video shoot to highlight the benefit of your landscape garden, for example? So that's what I mean. It's these small things that can help you stay 1 or 2 steps ahead, perhaps, of the competition. But I think the biggest gains there is it reduces the distance. So you could show me a home now remotely without me having to travel. And that reduces the cost and time input for all of us. And you wouldn't need to build a show home. So there's a couple of different applications there.
Absolutely. And how about construction technology? Can you talk about some of the trends?
Sure.
Like I love the idea of 3D printed homes.
Exactly. Well, the thing with construction technologies is some really cool ideas. And so 3D printing is a one, and it literally is a machine that squirts out, concrete and stuff and builds a wall, and then people go in and finish the property. The technology is not. It looks like it's like a cake thing where you do piping. It hasn't got the best finish necessarily, and so it's improving. And it's been a little while since I looked at that, so maybe it's advanced since I looked. But you can use this sort of technology to get into remote locations, especially after a crisis. So if there's a flood or something like that, people have lost their homes, you can actually drop in 3D printers and build low-cost housing pretty quickly. So it's got that kind of application. And then you've got other technologies, lots of emerging things like modular construction, for example, alternative types of building materials that can be used. The challenge is this. The challenge is the establishment. So when I say the establishment, and again, forgive me if I use any terminology which is not necessarily from the States, but the lenders, and the valuers, and then the other sort of professional bodies are a bit resistant to change. And so whilst you could build a house out of straw, literally, or clay bricks, those sorts of things, which are in keeping with the landscape, it would be difficult to get that appraised and insured and lent against, and that's the challenge right now. So sometimes the technology is running ahead of the establishment, the institutions, the regulators, and that's part of the challenge here.
Well, here in the States, we're starting to see 3D printing. California and New York are more open-minded with these things. So we're seeing a 3D printed community pop up in California. And then modular homes, that's being adapted right now. That's sure. more commonplace here in the States.
When we've got people experimenting with that, say in the UK, we've got, for example, some of the insurance companies, believe it or not, are investing in modular construction or offsite, which is constructed offsite and then brought to site to be assembled. So it reduces the time on site quite considerably, which is an advantage.
Can you explain to our listeners, some of them may not be familiar with modular construction, what that is?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Lego. So
Correct.
yeah, so it's building blocks built in a factory. So it's built to a very high standard based on accurate drawings, cut and shaped and prepared off-site in a factory location, and then it's shipped to site. And usually it's assembled within days rather than weeks. And so it, as I say, reduces time on site, and that's very helpful, particularly if you're in a difficult environment to work outside, where it's too hot or too cold, for example. So it allows you to do that. And time on site, that means that you can actually work on multiple projects at the same time if you have a construction team, whilst your modular construction is done off site. So it's like piecemeal building blocks. So it's the prefab homes after the war in the UK were the same thing, but the technology is much better now.
It's as durable as a normal home built from concrete.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now we're talking about cutting cost and being more productive. What about from an environmentally sustainability perspective? That's big, especially with people that are going into their 30s, buying homes. That's big topic for people these days.
Completely. And you've just seen, I don't know what news you've got over there, but energy prices, for example, right now are really skyrocketing
All over the world. Yeah.
All over the world, fossil fuels in particular, price of gas, and not necessarily very environmentally friendly. So there's a massive push with climate change and green energy, and that's coming from governments over the world. And there's a lot of political support, and there's a lot of financial aid, which is getting behind this movement, because we need to reduce, our carbon footprint. The problem here is that a lot of the real estate is pre-existing. And so in new buildings, you can obviously put in the new latest technology and design it with energy efficiency in mind. In where I live, some of the houses are well over 100 years old.
Yes, I've been to London. Yes,
yeah.
There's not a lot of room.
No, a lot of room. Sometimes you can't. There's no insulation between the walls. There's drafts. There's things like this. So it's retrofitting is going to be the challenge. And one of the latest announcements from the UK government, for example, is a subsidy scheme for ground source heat pumps or alternative heat recovery pumps. And that the idea is to replace gas boilers. But if I just tell you that a basic ground source heat pump is about 4 times the cost of a gas boiler. So there's a bit of a way to go in terms of making the technology affordable and adoption, and how do you retrofit it in 95% of the housing stock when you're only adding to the new places. So I think there's a lot that's coming. Smart homes is a good way to control your energy costs. You can put in different types of technology to improve, like heat source pumps and things like that. Solar, wind, if you've got the space.
It'll make a real estate investor more competitive that way too. When they're trying to get out of the deal and sell it, you have a smart home. So
yeah, it can be attractive. Obviously, the real cost saving is with the user, the occupier. So it's good for build to rent operators, but people who are buying homes will be looking for more energy efficient homes going forward. You're right.
So it's more attractive that way. Yes. And we talked about blockchain a little bit earlier. Can you explain that too? Because people are puzzled about that as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand it completely, but I think the best analogy I can give, it's kind of a database meets the internet. And then you get these sort of literally these blocks of data. The benefit of the blockchain is it's what is called a distributed environment. So it's not owned by a central body. It's distributed and it could be literally global. So nobody really owns it. I mean, there are some blockchains which are owned, but generally nobody owns it. And it's very secure because the data is kind of preserved forever. And there's lots of people who test the data. So it's very secure. It can run independently anywhere in the world, and it's relatively cheap from a transaction point of view. And if you consider, I mean, obviously we're from first world countries in the most part, but Yeah, about 30% of the world's population don't have access to a bank account. And bank transactions are relatively expensive. But blockchain technology and transactions are relatively cheap. So it can really change the world's financial system. And another great application of blockchain technology, because I mentioned that the data is stored forever. So you could, for example, store all of the data about a house transaction for years and in what's called a smart contract. So it's secure, it reduces paper, it's portable. So there's a couple of really interesting use classes. And another one I'm really interested in is funding using the blockchain. And so you could use it as to attract investment in your schemes. You could also use it as an investor, having fractional ownership, perhaps in real estate, because real estate is quite expensive to get involved in. You need hundreds of thousands, whereas you could get involved with hundreds. That's what blockchain can do. So it's a fascinating technology. I think it's another one that is it's in a fight. And you just need to look at what China's done. China has banned cryptocurrencies of all descriptions, for example.
They've banned a lot of things because they see the future of it and they're afraid of it.
That's right. So, there's this battle, there's this tension going on between the establishment, in this case, governments and banks, and, these emerging technologies, such as blockchain, cryptocurrency. So who's going to win? Who's going to win? Who do you think is going to win?
I think the AI and data and prop tech and all these developments are going to win because that's the direction everything is going.
You mentioned AI. Actually, I think this is the real. I was probably understating the value of artificial intelligence. I actually think artificial intelligence is the next, or is already the big thing. And I think this is already with us. We're already starting to see the impact.
Of course.
Algorithms and bots and things like this. Of course, some of the big tech companies are using this technology, but we can use it too.
Your advantage.
Absolutely. So anyway, I get a bit passionate about maybe blockchain and maybe artificial intelligence, and I think also the sharing economy. They're the ones I'm really watching.
You're really watching that the fourth industrial revolution unfolding before our eyes. Now, right. what would you say to those investors out there who are afraid of the change and who think that this transformation is going to take over? What would you say to these people?
Do you want me to be frank?
Yes.
Okay. Adapt or die. Adapt or die is what I would say. So the thing is, I talked about real estate being traditionally slow moving. The US actually is quite quick, actually, relatively speaking. But transactions are relatively slow. It's difficult to upgrade the housing stock. Some of the associated industries, like the legal profession, for example, are using antiquated systems. And there's a lot of things pulling it down. Whereas, of course, technology is moving at such a pace. And I say a lot of the technology providers are ahead of the game. And then the regulators are trying to catch up. But I think here's the thing. Technology is here to stay. It's going to impact every area of our lives. Just you mentioned Uber and Airbnb, and you can see that where the changes are coming. It's pay for use instead of pay as the asset. It's different types of commercial contract, and it's different types of services and a rating culture. Let's say that, so that we will be judged as property owners by our tenants who are actually customers. And I think this is going to change the ways we're viewed. And I think if we don't adapt, we're going to bury our heads in the sand and we're going to get a big bite on our backsides.
So can you explain a little bit more about that, how this ownership model is changing, going from, homes being seen less of an asset and more of a service, and the occupants are tenants as customers? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm an old guy now, right? But if I look at my kids who are in their 20s, they don't buy anything. they go and stay in an Airbnb, but they get an Uber to get there. They just pay for the convenience. Perhaps, I know people who will go and live in a different country for a month or 3 months.
I've done
And
that.
you've done that.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a different mindset. And we need to think about the generations coming through and what they've grown up with. They've grown up with instant everything. They've grown up with, nobody says, well, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I don't say I'm going to get a taxi. I say I'm going to get an Uber. It's becoming ubiquitous, this sort of terminology.
Even in New York City, nobody gets a taxi. Everybody calls an Uber. So it's the same here as well.
It's the same. And so if we don't pay attention as, more experienced real estate investors to these emerging trends, we're going to get overtaken. So I think, housing as a service, community living, the blurring of lines between home, work, and, leisure, all trends to watch. And if we just think we're just going to buy a single family home somewhere, rent it out forever and a day, and that'll be the end of that, then things are going to change and we're going to get outpaced.
Absolutely. Even the way the communities are being, the desirability of communities, people want walkability and easy access to everything.
Yeah, I mean,
that is an emerging trend.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the guys who's like a futurist who I interviewed, he was talking about, these sort of out of city hubs with, shared transportation systems and little energy hubs as well that they're plugging into. So all these things, you've got these smart city experiments that are taking place in different parts of the world. So I think there's a lot of experimentation, there's a lot of emerging applications. And I think, as to go back to your original point, if we, I expect to be in the real estate sector for decades, but I think if I don't adapt over those decades, I might sort of become uncompetitive, with my offerings and lose sight of, good opportunities, devalue my asset, reduce my income stream. Let's think about the bottom line. You talked about ROI earlier.
Yes.
I'm using technology here, and we're talking about technology, but really for me, I'm a value-adding investor, and for me, if it doesn't hit the bottom line, I'm kind of not interested. So that's a bit of an extreme.
What's the point?
Exactly. What's the point?
If you're not getting a good ROI.
Yeah. So I'm not coming at technology saying, "Oh, that's great. That's nice and shiny, and that sort of thing. Great user interface." No, I'm thinking, what are the uses that will impact my investment and make it perform better for me, or at least keep me ahead of the competition.
Wonderful. All right. Richard, thank you so much for your time.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely.